Now we're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Audrey Timm. Audrey is an AIPH Technical Advisor. She's a horticultural scientist specialised in ornamental horticulture, spanning many aspects of horticulture. Audrey's career has covered academic research in South Africa, industry support training and on-farm research and development in Australia, and promoting the connection between design and ecology in urban landscapes with the University of Sheffield in the UK. Audrey joined AIPH as Technical Advisor in 2019. She also leads our Green City initiative and our activities on plant health, sustainability and novelty protection. We recently conducted a survey which was led by Audrey and also Alistair Yeomans, and Audrey is going to present the results of that survey now. So please can we have the presentation now?
Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Thank you all for your interest in plant health and particularly in the AIPH International Plant Health Survey. AIPH serves to promote trade in ornamental horticulture. We serve our industry through programs that highlight the benefits of plants to our lives and the planet. And we undertake activities that respond appropriately to things that might limit global trade in ornamental horticulture. AIPH initiated this international survey to review the existence and scope of current plant health industry support programs that facilitate knowledge, interpretation, and compliance with national and international regulatory frameworks. We worked with Mr. Alistair Yeomans to develop the survey and to analyse the results. Alistair is manager of the UK's Plant Healthy Scheme and is also a freelance consultant, and he will join the Q&A session after this presentation. A full written report on the survey results will be available through AIPH. The reason why this needs our attention now is that international travel and trade has tripled in volume in the last decade, and this can quickly spread pests and diseases around the world, potentially causing great damage to native plants and the environment. This is a very clear message of the International Year of Plant Health. What we're looking to achieve through the survey is to find out how industry organisations are working to enhance plant biosecurity in their regions, and to share information on voluntary systems to improve biosecurity within businesses and across supply chains. Plant health industry support programs aim to enable healthy production systems, cost-effective and reliable movement of low-risk plant material within global supply chains, and traceability in the event of a biosecurity threat. If you look at the logo for the International Year of Plant Health, you may notice that the first zero in the date is the logo for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These goals describe ways in which businesses, organisations, cities, countries can all demonstrate the contribution that they make to a sustainable world. Not going into detail, but just to illustrate three key areas where the ornamental horticulture industry believes that we can make a difference. SDG 3, to ensure healthy lives and well-being. SDG 11, relates to resilient and sustainable cities. And SDG 15 relates to ecosystems, biodiversity, and the environment. The results of the survey revealed the complexity and diversity of the ornamental horticulture industry. Thank you very much to all who completed the survey. Your contribution is very much appreciated. We received 40 responses from around the world, and this graphic shows the sectors that are represented, with the majority being growers. One of the things that it was important to find out from the survey was what was the threat from plant pest diseases? What damage could they cause if systems to control them failed? This diagram shows that our industry considers that growing systems and trade in live plants and cut flowers are at high risk. And certainly this is the most common pathway for introduction of plant pests and diseases to a new area. It's considered to be movement through the movement of live plants. This highlights how important it is for the horticulture industry to have robust, consistent and comprehensive plant health systems. With this in mind, we asked how effective regulatory frameworks are. Survey respondents considered tracking systems for regulated pests and diseases to be accurate or very accurate. And there was strong agreement that an appropriate level of protection may be achieved by international regulatory frameworks. In general, the national measures are considered to be effective on a scale of 7.4 out of 10. While this is certainly a positive indication, we have to analyse this a bit deeper and ask whether this is enough. What more could we do? Where is there room for improvement? The survey certainly indicates that there is confidence in the regulatory framework. However, comments received indicate that the practicality of the regulatory process can be insufficient. Capacity is often insufficient, as shown by these figures. Reports here from the United States and New Zealand are that plant inspectors can only inspect a limited number of consignments, with the sheer volume of imports growing tremendously. This is further challenged by our industry because we produce and trade a wide range of products. Look at any nursery catalogue and it could have thousands of varieties from hundreds of genera. Despite this, greater regulation is not ideally where we would look for improvement. The AIPH survey results reveal that many countries and regions rely on a reactive approach to plant health. This means that the industry relies on endpoint inspections, which have limited capacity and only address pests and diseases that are already known to be threats. A systems approach is proactive and reduces risks through standardizing and implementing safe nursery practices. The systems approach gives the ornamental horticulture industry the control and responsibility to achieve a high level of plant health that integrates with and supports the regulatory framework. It is this systems approach that is achieved by industry voluntary standards that represent policies, procedures, and practices that are integrated into a business's day-to-day operations. So we return to the question about how effective regulatory frameworks are in achieving plant health, and ask if industry voluntary systems approaches can improve plant health and support regulatory frameworks. There is plenty of evidence that endpoint inspections are only partially effective, and we have already considered the complexity of our industry. The review by Park and Grunwald describes preliminary work in developing standards and systems for the nursery industry, and mentions two that draw from the logic of the HACCP system, which identifies hazards and highlights where in the system the risk can best be managed. Some of you will already be familiar with the HACCP approach. The AIPH International Plant Health Survey, as mentioned earlier, aimed to find out the existence and scope of current plant health industry support programs in our global industry. The survey showed that there are many countries and regions that do not have a voluntary industry plant health program. It is also clear that there is interest in finding out more about voluntary industry standards, and some evidence that market opportunities might benefit. This is the same chart as the previous slide to report the existence of an industry voluntary standard. 22 of the respondents reported that they are aware of a voluntary standard, and a total of 25 standards were reported. Some were repeated by other respondents, and some were not standards for the ornamental horticulture industry, though all information provided was very useful. Sifting through the results, we identified a total of 11 different voluntary standards that were the basis for an independent certification scheme. You will hear full details of some of these later in the conference. To understand how uniform these standards are, the survey asked for details of what is included in each standard. There is a lot of detail on this slide. What is important, though, to notice is the length of the blue strips, as these indicate how many of the voluntary standards included in a particular feature. For example, all standards required the development of a business-specific plant health and biosecurity policy, and all required records to be kept of plant health monitoring. 6 out of the 10 had involved the National Plant Policy Organisation in developing the scheme, yet only 1 is accredited by a national accreditation body. All but 1 includes a glossary of terms and conditions. The real value of an industry systems approach comes from how widely it's put into practice. This result, that suggests a low uptake in some countries or regions, needs further investigation. Some of these voluntary standards are quite new, such as the UK Plant Healthy Certification Scheme, which was launched a little over a year ago. It would be quite understandable that uptake has yet to spread widely across the industry. To understand a bit more about the motivation to participate in an industry scheme, the survey explored what the benefits and limitations to adoption of a scheme might be. A fee to participate was reported to limit uptake. Any additional cost to a business obviously needs to be justified. There are several features that encourage participation in a scheme, and these suggest credibility, reliability, and responsibility of a business to plant health. The use of a certification mark or logo would be important in demonstrating to customers a business's commitment to plant health. The survey reports on 11 voluntary standards around the world. There are a few that we know about that are not captured in the survey, and there may well be more. For an industry such as the ornamental horticultural industry that involves movement of live plants and cut flowers across regional and national borders, it is important to understand how well these standards are aligned, as this is a measure of an industry-wide, consistent approach to plant health. This also provides those countries and regions that have no standards some baseline information of what might be required by a standard that would maintain consistency and uniformity across global supply chains. Our final question in the survey asked, do you think there's a need for a voluntary, interregional, international plant health and biosecurity standard? More than 3/4 of the respondents believe that there is a need. An international voluntary standard would aim to enable existing or new national or regional certification schemes to relate to each other. This would ensure that biosecurity measures are maintained across international trade pathways, providing a high level of confidence across markets and delivering the message to national regulatory bodies that the ornamental horticulture industry considers plant health to be so highly important that we share the responsibility. There are some key points that we would need to consider. It is vitally important to understand the barriers and motivations for joining plant health schemes. Some of these were mentioned earlier, as was the need for a broad uptake. We need to understand what impacts a proactive systems approach would deliver. Would this positively affect production efficiency? Would it facilitate easy movement across supply chains? We would certainly need close collaboration and alignment with regulatory frameworks. And it would be critical to ensure that the terminology used was clear and complete and that the system was implemented consistently and uniformly across regions. To close, I would like to again thank everyone who responded to the survey. Your contribution enables AIPH to connect and serve a truly global ornamental horticultural industry. And a reminder that the full report of the results of the survey will be available through AIPH. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Audrey for that presentation, and we're joined by Audrey now, and also Alistair Yeomans is joining us, I believe. Hello, Alistair. Alistair has worked in coordinating the survey, helping develop the questions and processing the results. So welcome, Alistair. And I would like to reiterate my thanks to all those who took the time to complete the survey and provide this information for us. So once again, questions for Audrey and Alistair, please add them to the chat section on the stage line, and then I'll pick them up and pass them on. Right, so it's good to see that there are a number of standards out there, and there appears that there is a degree of commonality between them. Can you tell when most of these standards were established? I don't know who wants to answer that
yes,
one. Alistair, yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much, Tim and Audrey, for inviting me to speak today or be part of this workshop. Yes, and in answer to your question, one of the standards was developed in the 90s, one in 1995, and pretty much the rest of them were developed in the last decade or so. So they're fairly new, some of these standards. I should also say there are other more established standards that are more general in their nature that have integrated plant health and biosecurity into them. But yeah, I would, generally speaking, I would say voluntary standards, certainly the ones that were reported, are fairly young.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So for a standard to be effective, one of the things that came through there was it needs to be a strong uptake in those standards within a country. What was the uptake amongst those that have standards in their country? How well received were they within the country where they were operating?
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, thanks, Tim. You obviously have to bear the last question in mind, which is how long the standard actually has been in place, or the scheme is based on the standard. But just to give some results, out of the standards that were reported on, 6 were either low or very low in terms of their uptake, and 3 were high or very high, and one of them was a no answer. Obviously, it needs further analysis, but there was no obvious correlation to cost. And indeed, actually, the 3 schemes that were over a decade old, 2 said low and 1 said high. So I'm just looking at some notes. Yeah, I would say that's probably about a fair summary of the results on that question.
But I think with that, if I may add, that answer needs to be taken into account with the reasons for motivation to participate in a standard, and then the barriers to it. And certainly, some of the older standards, there might not have been that extra incentive, that motivation now, where we're finding regulatory systems are really quite stretched, and B, hugely more important because of climate change, where pests and disease are likely to spill and spread, and also from a perspective of greater trade. And so, certainly it might be that the generation of new standards over the last decade or so, and certainly half of those of the last decade came in the last 3 years or so. So there certainly is a move towards that, and it might be that incentive to participate in becomes now more prevalent. And the International Year of Plant Health has certainly been quite good at spreading the word that we need to be more active, and as an industry we need to be more proactive. You know, the survey did look a little bit more broadly into the reasons that might be limiting, and certainly cost is one of those. And there's layers of analysis that we can look at and we'll report on in the final report. So a bit more detail will come out of that.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Peter in Australia. Are there any incentives, commercial and market drivers that encourage the uptake of any of the schemes?
Well, I mean, that was one of the questions we asked, was the recognition of participation in the scheme through use of a logo for marketing purposes, was that considered to be a motivator? And certainly that came quite strongly that was a motivator. Now, obviously, if there's extra cost in the scheme and you get the motivation from marketing, then your customers need to appreciate that the marketing logo has a benefit. Some of the respondents said that participation in the scheme and compliance with the scheme was necessary for public or private procurement systems, and that's another motivator. Alistair, do you have something to add to that?
I mean, the only one I can really add to is my experiences here in the UK, and certainly I'm aware of procurement policies that are starting to look for biosecurity marks or logos in terms of the companies that supply the various schemes.
Okay, thank you. We've got another conference here from Hein Boon. The conference is about plant health, but what do you think of the following? A solid system approach would require to have control on all aspects in the production chain that might have impact on plant health, including growing media and phytosanitary safety. So I suppose, are we asking here, should a scheme or a system encompass the inputs into the plant production process as well as the plant material itself? So I don't know who to direct that one to, but you can.
I mean, there's two aspects to it. I'll just do a snippet first and then pass over to Alistair to ask the bulk of it. But certainly when we looked at the survey, we looked at what sectors of the horticultural industry were represented, and the majority were growers. But certainly we had coverage from the whole supply chain. So we had breeders, retailers, and the logistics, the people who actually transport it, are really interested in it being a seamless and easy process and not being blocked at every turn if there's lack of confidence in plant security. So that's one part of the question. The other part, Alistair, was about what are the features that each that a standard would have, and in that there were certainly elements about suppliers. Do you want to add to that?
Yes, that's absolutely right, and that's really part of a HACCP process, I'll come on to it in the presentation I give on the plant health management standard later on this afternoon. But yeah, ultimately that's what we're looking at, all of those aspects of production, and to ensure that they are biosecure.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Sally Cullymore. Do you think there is a positive correlation between high uptake of a particular voluntary standard and the level of involvement and support by that country's NPPO?
I think that's something we'd really like to explore more. Certainly 60% of the standards that were reported in the survey had involvement of the NPPO in developing the standards. So there is a link there. Certainly some of the comments that came through were about how the industry engages with the regulatory process, and in some aspects it's quite strong, and in some there is a gap, and that's certainly something we'd like to explore further, I think.
Yes, just to add to that, if I heard correctly, what the IPPC is developing is some sort of information how these voluntary schemes and standards can be more closely related to regulatory frameworks, or indeed that relationship between a voluntary standard or scheme and an MPPO can be sensibly aligned, well then that's just great news. And I'd love to see that as soon as possible. It sounds a really sensible thing.
Mm.
Yes, I agree. And I think from Ralph's previous comment, I think he's expecting that to come fairly soon at this next meeting of IPPC. If it doesn't happen through, then it will be next year. So that's the kind of timescale he's looking at on that. Question from John Van Ralten. How many voluntary systems are international at the moment? So are there, from the ones that you looked at, how many are just national schemes? How many are international?
That's a very good question indeed, and it's something here in the UK that we've discussed, because we have some that are interstate, some that are some that are just national and can be actually inter-regional national, some that are just between a number of countries, some that are intercontinental, and so that there's all sorts of variations, and I think we'll make sure that's fleshed out quite clearly in the report. It will involve a little bit more analysis at this point, so I can't answer specifically, unfortunately, but it is an issue with, not an issue, sorry, it is an element that one has to be aware of these standards and schemes. What is the geography that they're actually covering?
And part of that is looking at the survey is looking at the different standards and the questions that we ask to get an idea of what features are in it. We can do a comparative approach that if one standard, even though it's national, how does it compare with another national standard? So therefore, it might not necessarily be promoting as an international standard, but it has an international basis to it, and that it is aligned with other national standards. I mean, there certainly were a couple that were international, but a lot of it is about, within our industry, things might be produced in one country, but then the market is in another country. So whose plant health standards are you responding to? The one in your country of production, or then the one of where your customers are? And that's something that's come across as one of the concerns about developing, or about being limited to just national regulations, that there isn't necessarily that dialogue between production and consumers. I mean, that's something, the survey is really the first snapshot, and we're looking at expanding it and doing some in-depth interviews to find out a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you. Just just a brief answer for this one, but you had most of the respondents said that international voluntary standard would be useful. 9 said it would not. I mean, can you did the survey tell you what the reasons were, why some thought it was useful, and why some thought it was not?
A little bit, it was, we tried to keep the survey as short as possible, but we did get some answers. And certainly some of those who said no, an international standard wouldn't be good, were quite happy that either they had internal standards that were sufficient for their internal supply chains, but that they thought that, and others thought that, the national regulations were sufficient. Certainly there seems to be a little bit of concern with cut flower industries, that they aren't as well supported by standards as the nursery industry. So that was it. We didn't get a true fleshing out, but certainly the ones who said yes were very much aware of international movement of products and how that would be good. It's certainly something that we'd like to follow up a bit more with those who did say no, and get a bit more deeper into the answer. Alistair, do you have something quick to add to that?
Only one very small thing, and that was that one respondent said that they just need the industry and the MPPO needs to be, the communication between those needs to be improved prior to sort of looking at voluntary standards, be they national or international.
Okay, thank you. There's one final short question, which is one I might ask you anyway. When will the survey report be published?
As soon as
Someone
we
after
can.
my own heart.
Initially, we had hoped it would be ready for the conference, but getting the survey respondents and the survey reports back took a little bit longer than we hoped for. Very, very grateful for everybody who did reply. So we're looking at working, well, I mean, Alistair and I have been working on it through the week. I can't give a firm date, but as soon as we can, it will be there, and we'll be sure to let everybody know when it's ready.
Great, thank you. There are some more questions there, but if you wouldn't mind picking them up by answering them directly in the chat, then please do that. And but for now, we have to close it off there. But thank you very much to Audrey and Alistair for the work that's gone on for most of this year, really, in preparing, conducting this survey, completing this research, publishing it today. It's the first time it's been publicized, and we will be issuing the report, and we will press release it when we are ready for that. And please subscribe to our newsletter and FCI, and we will make sure that all those here today receive that information as soon as it is available. So thanks very much, and we will come back to you, Alistair, later on for your presentation on the UK scheme. And thanks, Audrey, and we say bye for now.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.